Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the steam and stink of ancient Rome, not through the marble arches of the Forum or the glistening villas of the elite, but through a much more aromatic doorway. You're not a senator, you're not a gladiator, you're not even the guy who sells figs in the market. No, tonight you are a Forica Custodia, a toilet attendant at one of Rome's many public baths. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in darkness, the kind of black that clings to your eyelashes and makes everything feel damp and slightly judgmental. Your bed, a straw mat that might once have had ambitions of being comfortable, creaks as you rise. Your back creaks louder. You shuffle across the stone floor, grab your shift-stained tunic, and tie it around your waist with a cord that's older than your optimism. The bathhouse won't open for another hour, but your shift starts long before the first sandal hits the mosaic tiles. There's last night's damage to assess. Always damage. Always worse than you hope. You trudge toward the forica, the communal latrine. Not a dainty corner room, but a long stone bench with keyhole-shaped holes spaced along it, like a demented game of musical chairs. No stalls, no partitions, just 20 or so marble seats, cool to the touch and very, very public. A social event, really. You carry with you two buckets, one of cold water and one of vinegar, and a wooden pole with a sea sponge tied to the end, Rome's answer to toilet paper. Yes, the legendary tersorium. This will become your closest companion, your greatest burden, and, in your darkest moments, your only audience. The air inside the latrine is thick, not just with smell, though that too. It's a complex bouquet of ammonia, fermented legumes, and lost hope, but also with humidity. The stone walls sweat, and you do too, before even lifting a finger. You start with the floor, always the floor, because some patrons believe the holes are suggestions, not instructions. You slosh water, scrub with a worn brush, and try not to think too hard about the slipperiness beneath your sandals. A rat scurries by. You nod to it like an old coworker. Next, the seats themselves. You wipe each marble opening like it's royalty. Some patrons leave surprises, like half-eaten olives, or philosophical graffiti. Time is like urine, uncontainable. You snort, the wit of a man in mid-defecation. You dip the sponge stick in vinegar water, swirling it gently like you're preparing a fine tea, except this tea is cursed, and so is your life. This sponge will be used by multiple guests today, rinsed occasionally, judged never. Hygiene in ancient Rome is a choose-your-own adventure, and your adventure involves a lot of other people's choices. The hardest part is the silence. Before the chaos starts, it's just you, your tools, and the awareness that Rome, for all its aqueducts and marble columns, has not yet invented dignity for this job. You pause to lean against a pillar, and your tunic clings to your damp skin. Your stomach grumbles. Breakfast is a crust of bread waiting in your pouch, likely accompanied by a generous helping of dirt and lint. But you can't eat yet. Not while the sponge bucket's still full of yesterday's regrets. You glance at the wall where someone scratched a crude drawing of a senator and a donkey. Beneath it, same end, different face. Political satire, latrine style. Historians still argue whether such graffiti was a genuine form of free speech, or just the Roman equivalent of bathroom stall ramblings. You chuckle, then gag. Something moved under the third seat. You investigate. Probably a toad or a cursed fig, but it's gone now. You say a quick prayer to Cloacina, goddess of the sewers, because yes, Rome had one of those, and frankly, she's the only divine figure who might actually listen to you. A sound interrupts your thoughts, a faint echo of sandals on stone. Someone's coming early. You straighten up, wipe your hands on your already ruined tunic, and adopt your best neutral expression. The day begins. And you? You've already lost. You don't need to see the man's face to know what's coming. The clack clack of his sandals is brisk, entitled. The scent of his perfume arrives first, a powerful cloud of myrrh and arrogance, and then he rounds the corner, toga flapping, like he's a ship at full sail. Is it ready? He barks without looking at you. It better be vinegar today, not that goat spit nonsense. You smile the way a tree might smile at an axe. Yes, sir, fresh vinegar. From the market this morning. Lie. It's from yesterday. Slightly fermented. But let's be honest, so is he. He plops himself down onto the third seat, the one you just cleaned. You feel a flicker of misplaced pride. That marble sparkled for 5 whole seconds. Now it creaks beneath him. You hold out the tersorium, sponge stick upright like a noble offering. He doesn't take it. No, no, you do it. That's what you're here for, isn't it? Today's going to be that kind of day. You glance down at the sponge, a weary, waterlogged relic of too many bottoms past. The sponge has its own tragic biography at this point. You dip it in the vinegar again, give it a gentle squeeze, and do your duty, eyes focused on the middle distance like a soldier in an emotional battlefield. The man grunts, thanks you with a dismissive nod, and begins a loud monologue about grain tariffs and his neighbor's illegitimate son. Classic Roman small talk. Behind him, the sun has started to filter through the high windows, casting a holy glow across the very unholy scene. It catches the steam rising from the corner cistern like incense in a cathedral, and for a brief moment, the latrine looks majestic, and then someone sneezes violently behind you, and it's over. More patrons shuffle in, a cluster of older men, robed and chatty, still arguing about the exact moment the Republic died, as if it weren't decades ago. You know these men. They come every morning, same time, same hole, same complaints. Back in Sulla's day, one begins. You refill the vinegar bucket for the third time in 30 minutes. Every time you move the sponge, you hear the slosh of 1,000 regrets. The water level is lower now. Too low. You glance at the cistern in the corner and sigh. Time to make a refill run. Carrying a vinegar bucket through the bath complex isn't exactly a glamour parade. You pass men oiling their bodies, women haggling over perfumes, and children hurling olives like missiles. One child points at your bucket and whispers, "Is that for soup?" You do not answer. You reach the supply room, more of a vinegar dungeon really, and pour yourself a fresh fill from a ceramic jug marked clean in hastily scratched Latin. You hope it's accurate. Last week someone mislabeled fish brine, and that day ended in screaming and a very pink rash. On your way back, you nearly collide with a man in an absurdly elaborate toga, embroidered with tiny dolphins. "Watch it, slave," he mutters. You want to tell him you're not a slave. Technically, you're paid. Barely. But you've learned something valuable in this line of work. Dignity is optional, but job security isn't. Back in the latrine, the line has grown. A wealthy woman stands at the threshold, pinching her nose with one hand and fanning herself with the other. "You there, boy?" Do you not have rose water? You shake your head and motion to the vinegar. She looks at it like it just insulted her ancestry. I'll wait, she announces, and stomps off in a cloud of sandalwood and judgment. You return to the sponge. The original one is now beyond redemption. Time to swap it out. You head to the cabinet under the cistern, your shrine of replacement sponges. You choose one that is less horrifying. You tie it to the stick with a practiced twist, using the same knot your grandfather taught you. He too was a Forca Custodia, a proud line of sponge holders stretching back generations. You imagine your ancestors frowning down at you, or maybe laughing, probably both, and then it happens. The splash, you hear it before you feel it. A rogue step, a misjudged turn. Your sandal lands directly in the overflow channel, Rome's elegantly engineered, but very unfortunately angled waste gutter. The smell hits you first, then the cold. You hop back like a startled flamingo and bang your shin on the marble bench. One of the old men cackles. Careful, boy, the Cloaca Maxima has chosen you. Ha! Hilarious. You wipe your leg with the edge of your tunic, which, to be fair, was already mostly ruined. The vinegar bucket tips precariously as you try to balance, but by some miracle, it doesn't spill. You exhale. The smell follows. You glance up at the sun clock above the door. Mid-morning, just mid-morning. The rest of the day awaits. You pick up the sponge again and think, not for the first time, about running off to become a mime, or a grave robber, or maybe a goat. Anything but this. You don't get a lunch break. That's not a thing. What you get is something historians might generously call a brief pause between catastrophes. And today, that pause lasts exactly 4 minutes and 2 chews into your cold lentil cake before chaos finds you. The first sign is the sound. Not a scream, not yet, but a very specific, unmistakable gurgle. A digestive warning shot echoing off the stone walls of the bathhouse. You sigh mid-bite and brace for impact. Sure enough, 2 men barrel into the latrine like panicked oxen. One of them clutches his stomach, eyes wide, mouth forming the ancient Roman equivalent of move, move, move. He makes it to the third hole just in time, toga hiked up like a surrender flag. The second man isn't so lucky. He stumbles, trips on the hem of his tunic, and misses. You blink once. You chew once more. And then you slowly lower the lentil cake into your pouch. Goodbye, lunch. The man is apologizing profusely, over and over, as if words can unspill what has been spilt. It was the oysters, he moans, face pale as marble. They were warm. They should not have been warm. You nod sympathetically, while reaching for the emergency bucket. It's labeled Eris in charcoal, after the goddess of discord. Fitting. Cleanup takes 15 minutes, 4 rinses of the sponge, and every ounce of your remaining dignity. By the end of it, your left sandal has developed a persistent squelch, and the room smells like regret. And that's when the fighting starts. 2 young men enter, clearly members of some local political faction or another. You've stopped keeping track. They immediately begin shouting over which seat belongs to whom. It's mine, one insists, slamming a scroll onto the nearest bench. My father used this spot during Saturnalia. Oh, really? The other snaps. Then your father must have been very comfortable with being wrong. You try to intervene gently. Gentlemen, perhaps choose any of the 17 other empty seats? They both glare at you, like you've insulted their ancestors and kicked a sacred chicken. One throws a sandal. It misses you, but hits the vinegar bucket, sending a fragrant splash across the marble. The crowd gasps. Someone applauds. You mop in silence. the rhythm of your strokes becoming almost meditative. Left, right, splash. Left, right, despair. This too is your life. Outside, the sound of the bathhouse grows louder. Water splashing, children shrieking, vendors hawking towels and honey cakes. But in here, it's just you, the sponge, and a rotating cast of bodily functions. A tall, grim faced man enters next. He nods solemnly and heads to the far end of the latrine. He carries a scroll and begins muttering to himself. You recognize the type: a philosopher, possibly stoic, definitely constipated. He groans occasionally, philosophically, and seems to be debating the nature of suffering with himself. You hear snippets. Pain is perception. The soul must master the body. Oof. He makes eye contact with you mid strain. Do you think Seneca ever had trouble with this? He asks. You pause. I'm not sure, sir, but I know the sponge doesn't judge. He nods solemnly, as if you've said something profound, and then he asks for assistance. You grab the sponge stick. Moments like this, you drift out of your body. You float above yourself, watching a man with a vinegar soaked sponge and a slightly warped sense of self worth perform the world's most humbling ritual. This is my job, you think. This is my purpose. And just when you think the shift might settle, a new patron arrives. He is massive, towering, oiled, wearing only a scrap of linen and the distant stare of someone who has seen many battles. A gladiator. He strides into the latrine like he owns it, sniffing the air and grunting approvingly. You keep it clean, he says to you, voice like gravel being poured into a wine jug. You nod. I do my best. He thumps you on the back with a hand the size of your entire torso. You collapse slightly under the pressure. Respect, he says. Then he squats without ceremony on the center seat. You hear a noise, a long, echoing, frankly heroic noise. He sighs in satisfaction. You stare at the wall and wonder if this is the high point of your day. Then he calls you over. Need the stick. Of course he does. You obey. When he finishes, he stands and stretches like a cat in a coliseum. You've got a strong stomach, he says, grinning. Ever thought about the arena? You blink. I work with sponges, sir. Same thing, really, he laughs. Blood and guts. Just different orifices. You don't know whether to feel flattered or profoundly cursed. The sun is higher now, the room warmer, and somehow the smell is shifting, sweetened by heat and olive oil. You recognize the signs. The day is far from over. You're barely halfway in. The gladiator nods and walks out, leaving the scent of iron and sweat and whatever glory smells like. You dip the sponge again, wipe your hands, and prepare for the next round of visitors. And you think, not for the last time, I should have been a baker. There's something uniquely humbling about trying to warm a marble toilet seat with your own body heat, especially when the person you're doing it for is glaring at you like you're a particularly underachieving centurion. Still cold, she huffs. You stand and bow slightly, even though your knees crack like ancient scrolls unrolling. Apologies, Domina. It's been a brisk morning. She raises one eyebrow, the kind of aristocratic lift that suggests you might be replaced by a younger, hotter sponge holder. Then she sits, carefully adjusting her stola to avoid contact with anything unplanned. The marble lets out a small groan beneath her, as if it too is tired of all this. You hover nearby, trying to look useful without breathing too loudly. This is your least favorite part of the job. Not the smell, not the mopping, not even the accidental splashback from an overenthusiastic senator. No, it's this, toilet diplomacy, because now she wants to talk. You know, I once saw a bathhouse in Alexandria, she says, sighing as if the memory itself were exfoliating. They had cushions, Velvet. Imported. You nod. You've heard this story before. She tells it every other Tuesday. They said Cleopatra herself might have sat there once. Can you imagine? A queen on a velvet toilet. You can't, but you smile anyway. She continues, oblivious to the line building behind her, which now includes an impatient merchant, two whispering teenagers, and a man eating something suspiciously loud. Do you think she used sponges too? She asks suddenly. You blink. Well, everyone needs something, Domina. She laughs, delighted by your answer, then gestures grandly. Very well. Carry on. You wait for the seat to clear before stepping in to clean. It's warm, which is better than cold, but only in theory. You dunk the sponge, count to 5, and try not to imagine Cleopatra with a tersorium. Next in line is the merchant. He barrels in, practically shoving the doorframe aside. I've got 10 minutes, he announces. Make it fast. You don't know what he wants you to make fast exactly, but the urgency in his voice suggests he's on a timer, and that timer is made of lentils. He sits with no preamble, no words, and a deep, earth shaking exhale. Then he starts haggling. With you. 5 denarii, he says, for the whole bucket. I'll take it. I've got a tavern. Needs cleaning. Not picky. You blink. The vinegar bucket? He nods, eyes watering. Strong stuff. Cuts through anything. You try to explain that it's not for sale, that it's communal, that it's very much in active use by about 40 people a day, but he's not listening. He's gesturing toward his assistant at the door, who's holding a suspiciously empty wineskin. By the time he leaves, you're half convinced he's stolen the backup sponge. You make a mental note to check behind the cistern later. This wouldn't be the first sponge smuggler you've dealt with. Then the twins arrive. Not literal twins, though they do look disturbingly alike, but the two teenage boys who show up daily to make everything slightly worse. Their favorite pastime is sitting at opposite ends of the latrine and yelling philosophical insults at each other across the room. Cato was a bore, one screams. At least he wasn't your father, the other shouts back. They cackle, and you mop quietly between them, dodging insults and the occasional flying fig pit. This goes on for an hour. An hour. You try hiding once, behind the bucket shelf, just for 3 minutes of peace. You make it 90 seconds before a man stumbles in with a bleeding nose and demands to know if this is the vomitorium. You guide him out gently. He's confused, slightly drunk, and wearing one sandal. The smell suggests he's also recently lost a bet. As you return, you find that someone has left behind a scroll on the bench. Not just any scroll, a poem, handwritten, wax sealed, titled, Ode to My Morning Movements. You read one line, regret it instantly, then roll it up and tuck it behind a jar for later dramatic reading at the tavern. You finally get a minute to sit on the edge of the cistern, not a seat, not really, but elevated, clean-ish, almost regal. You sip water from your own little cup, hidden carefully behind the vinegar jugs, and then you hear it, that sound, the specific nasal ahem of a minor senator trying to assert major importance. You stand instantly. Ah, good, he says. Still here. Excellent. He enters, trailing perfume and resentment, and gestures at you like an emperor granting a favor. I need privacy. Clear the room. You blink. I don't have that kind of authority, sir. Nonsense, he snaps. You're the custodia. Custodia. That's practically a magistrate. You don't know whether to feel proud or deeply concerned about the man's understanding of social hierarchy. He pulls you aside. Listen, I have a condition. The sounds, the sensations. I need peace. and no witnesses. You want to suggest a private latrine or perhaps a quiet cave outside the city, but instead, you step outside and block the doorway like a noble guard of the least noble battlefield. Inside, you hear strange incantations, possibly an actual prayer, and what can only be described as interpretive farting. When he's finished, he emerges like a gladiator, returning from war. Your loyalty, he says, handing you a single coin, has been noted. You stare at the coin. It is technically currency, but it's bent, greenish, and smells faintly of onions. Still, it's the best tip you've had all week. You tuck the onion scented coin into your belt where it can mingle awkwardly with the other tokens of underappreciated labor: a broken hairpin, two nearly round pebbles, and what might be a fig stem or a dried lizard tail. You stopped keeping track after day 5 on this job. Just as you think maybe, just maybe, you'll get a moment to breathe, the vinegar bucket tips. You didn't touch it. You didn't bump it. It just tips. The culprit? A child, no older than 8, eyes wide, nose permanently runny, and clutching what appears to be a half-eaten pomegranate. He looks up at you, utterly unfazed by the miniature vinegar lake now gliding across the floor like a curious ghost. Oops, he says. You pause. You close your eyes. You breathe deeply and remind yourself that Roman law doesn't permit smiting tiny humans with sponge sticks. Instead, you mop. Again. The vinegar puddle makes its way toward the seat of a man who hasn't noticed anything because he's too busy composing love poetry aloud to himself. My heart flows like the aqueducts, he intones, yet clogs like the cloaca maxima when I see her face. You mop faster. This is what you do now. Race vinegar against ancient plumbing metaphors. Outside, you hear music. Flutes, tambourines, laughter. Someone is dancing in the palestra. The world continues spinning its golden delights just 20 feet from where you're scrubbing fermented foot juice off marble. You're halfway through wringing out the sponge when a new emergency waddles in. A noblewoman, pregnant, sweating, dramatic. She's escorted by 3 slaves and an air of urgency you recognize immediately. She needs to go, one slave hisses, barely concealing the terror in her eyes. You leap into action. Nearest seat, cleaned in 3 strokes, sponge refreshed, towel offered. All in less than 10 seconds. You could win some kind of terrible, terrible speed award. The woman lowers herself onto the marble, muttering something about figs and treachery. And then she screams, not in pain, not in labor. She has sat on a cold seat. This is barbarism, she shouts. You blink. She's accusing you. You, the person who has been soaking in other people's bodily tragedies since sunrise. My cousin in Ostia, she continues, has a toilet warmed with coals beneath. You wonder if her cousin is hiring. She demands to know your name. You don't give it. You just bow deeply and offer a folded cloth for her comfort. She throws it on the floor. 10 minutes later, she's gone. Along with her entourage, a cloud of sandalwood, and the lingering aura of someone who once tried goat milk as perfume and never looked back. You mop again, and then you realize you've run out of vinegar. You trudge back to the supply room, dreading the climb. It's 3 flights of steps, carrying sloshing liquid, in sandals, on slippery stone. You pass the masseurs, the barbers, the oil sellers, none of whom smell like vinegar or failure. The vinegar jug is heavy, too heavy. You wonder as your spine compresses another centimeter why this job doesn't come with a mule or a medal. Halfway back, a boy offers to help. You smile. He runs away laughing. Fine, that's fair. You return, arms shaking, only to discover the sponge stick has vanished. You freeze. No one's in the room but an old man, half asleep, and a girl humming to herself in the corner. Neither looks guilty, but you know better. Sponge theft. It's real. It's common. And it's war. You search under benches, behind the cistern, inside the cleaning cabinet. Nothing. You stare at the vinegar like it personally betrayed you. Eventually, you find the stick, propped up against the wall in the tepidarium, being used by a young man to scratch his back. You approach slowly. That's not a brush, you say gently. He shrugs. It is now. You don't argue. You take it, nod, and walk away. You've learned to choose your battles. This one isn't worth it. But you do rinse it, vigorously, possibly with a whisper of malice. By now your hands are raw. Your tunic is damp in all the worst places, and your nose has adjusted so thoroughly to the scent of excrement and vinegar that fresh air might now be an allergen. Then you hear it, the telltale squeal of a child, not the bucket tipper, a new one, screaming, running, trailed by a nursemaid shouting apologies. You try to step aside, but it's too late. The child crashes into your leg, spins like a tiny drunk satyr, and hurls. Right, onto your sandal. You stare down. The world slows. The nurse arrives, pale with horror. I'm so sorry. He ate a fig. A bad one. Or 5. You nod numbly. The sandal squishes. And the worst part? It was your good sandal. You don't yell. You just point toward the exit. The nurse picks up the child like a sack of cursed barley and vanishes. You slosh toward the mop bucket. Again. Always again. You tell yourself you've hit the low point of the day. But in the back of your mind, you know better. This was just lunch hour. By early afternoon, the air inside the latrine has turned from damp misery to stewed punishment. The sun outside is high, and the bathhouse has become a cauldron of steam, feet, and bad decisions. You fan yourself with a folded rag that used to be white, possibly during the reign of Augustus. The marble floor radiates heat upward, while the refuse channels burble ominously below, like hungry drains reconsidering their purpose in life. And the smell, oh, the smell. It's evolved beyond mere offense. It's curious, like burnt cabbage mixed with ambition and just a hint of despair. You try breathing through your mouth, but that only gives the taste more surface area. So you revert to the old Roman sponge handler's technique. Short-nosed sips and frequent mental escapism. Your feet ache. Your back is a question mark. And the vinegar in your bucket is now lukewarm, which means it smells like pickled failure. This is the part of the day where things blur. The guests no longer arrive in polite trickles. They come in waves, a trio of athletes from the palestra, a librarian with a scroll tucked under each arm, a foreign merchant who insists, loudly, that in Persia they use rose oil. Good for them, you mutter, holding out the sponge. And then he says the one thing you dread. Do you disinfect these between uses? You hesitate. He leans forward. Do you wash the sponge? You smile the way someone smiles when they realize a wild boar has entered the tavern. Slowly. With a lot of teeth? Of course, sir. Vinegar. Changed hourly. We stir it with devotion. He looks unconvinced. He wipes himself with his own cloth, drops it into a corner, and leaves without saying thank you. You consider setting that cloth on fire. You barely get a breath before the next patron arrives, a scribe, judging by the ink stains and squinting. He mumbles something about papyrus shortages and plops down without ceremony. 2 minutes in, he drops his stylus into the latrine. You hear the plop. You see the dawning horror on his face. No, he whispers. You wait. He looks at you. You wait longer. Could you? Retrieve it? You sigh. This isn't the worst thing you've been asked to retrieve. Not by a long shot. You grab the ladle. Yes, the ladle. The one no one talks about. Kept behind the cistern, hanging like a cursed relic. Its handle is worn, its purpose unspoken. With the grace of a man long past caring, you fish around in the darkness, praying to every obscure household god you can remember. Cloacina, Sterquilanus, whoever handles stylus affairs. You retrieve it. He thanks you profusely, then wipes it on his tunic and walks away like nothing happened. You've begun to disassociate by now. You watch your own hands mop the marble. You see your fingers offer the sponge. You hear your voice ask vinegar or water in a tone that is dangerously close to sarcastic. At some point, someone brings in a goat. You're not sure why. No one is. The goat sits beside a boy who appears to be eating figs and weeping softly. No one addresses the goat. The goat stares at you, dead-eyed, a fellow witness to life's messier details. And then mercifully a brief, holy, cool gust slips through the bathhouse's main atrium and kisses your forehead like a whisper from the gods. You stand still. You close your eyes. You imagine you're on a mountain, or a boat, or anywhere other than here. The breeze ends. Someone farts. The moment is gone. You return to your duties. You notice something strange. The drain, specifically the east side channel, is gurgling. Not the usual gurgle. This one has ambition. It bubbles. You crouch to inspect it. The pipe is clogged. You poke it with the ladle. Nothing. You prod again. There's resistance. You sigh. You've seen this before. It's time for the rod. You open the back closet and retrieve it. A long, coiled bronze tool designed to snake through drains. Heavy, rusty, heroic in its own disgusting way. You lower it into the drain, carefully twisting as you go. The smell is assertive. Your eyes water. Your soul cries. You hit something solid. Then a squish. Then, thwomp, it clears. A wave of unspeakable liquid flows freely once more. The drain sighs like a gladiator who's finally passed a kidney stone. You lean back, dripping, proud, nauseous. A group of schoolchildren walk by and cheer. The poop shaman, one calls out. You bow. You have fans now. You don't know how to feel about that. A few minutes later, your boss appears. A portly man with a permanent wine stain on his toga and a voice like bees in a jar. You're late for the noon vinegar log, he snaps. You blink. The what? The log, the record. How many sponges, how much vinegar, how many noble backsides have graced our benches today? You open the wax tablet and pretend you've written anything. You haven't. You've been busy. You scribble wildly, making up numbers that sound plausible but not suspicious. Historians still argue whether these sponge logs were ever accurate or just creative writing exercises with bonus trauma. Your boss doesn't check. He just nods, belches, and waddles away. You sit for a moment finally. Your sponge is clean. Your bucket is mostly full. Your enemies are currently not throwing sandals. This is what passes for peace. Then a small voice speaks. Excuse me. I think I lost my ring. Down there. You stare at the girl. You stare at the hole. And you wonder briefly if this sponge would float well enough to carry you to freedom down the Cloaca Maxima. You lean over the latrine seat and peer into the hole, blinking at the darkness below like it might blink back. A lost ring. That's today's plot twist. You briefly wonder what gods you offended in a previous life. Then again, You're a toilet attendant in this one, so probably all of them. The girl stands behind you with big, hopeful eyes. She's maybe 12. She's also wearing a tunic so clean and white it feels like an insult. Her little brother tugs at her sleeve and whispers, Mama said not to touch anything. You nod. Smart woman. But the girl is still staring at you, and now her bottom lip is starting to quiver. There it is. The weaponized guilt. You grab your ladle. Again. Back into the abyss it goes. The spoon disappears into the moist echo chamber below, scraping gently against what you pray is just stone. You swirl, dig, pause. Something clinks. You freeze. You fish. Out comes a ring, miraculously. Possibly a little greenish around the edges, but definitely a ring. The girl gasps, claps, and thanks you so sweetly you almost forget the smell. She even offers you a coin. You look at the coin. It's shaped like a coin. That's about it. You accept it like it's a gold bar from Nero's vault. She skips off, and you toss the ladle into the vinegar bucket like it's been permanently cursed. Which, to be clear, it has. You're just settling back onto your supply crate, your throne, your bastion, your splinter filled friend when it happens. The gossip shift. This is a daily occurrence. The latrine turns into a Roman talk show. It starts with two women in their 30s, both with hair so elaborately braided it probably took an army of attendants and 3 scrolls of instructions. One lowers herself onto the seat with a sigh. The other hovers nearby, like a hawk looking for a scandal. Oh, she was here earlier, the seated one says. No, she didn't. Oh, yes, wearing that tunic. I almost mistook her for a floor rag. They both laugh like trained courtiers and glare at you briefly, just to remind you that you're invisible unless needed. Soon more join. One by one, women take their seats or lean casually against pillars, exchanging whispers sharper than any dagger. You've learned to identify every social class by their posture alone, how the wealthy cross their ankles versus how the baker's wife squats with professional efficiency. They discuss everything from politics to fashion to whose husband has been seen visiting which perfumed bathhouse. You keep your eyes down and your ears open, not because you're nosy, but because knowing who's cheating on who is occasionally useful. When you need favors like, say, sponge replacements or bread that isn't mostly air. Then suddenly one woman turns to you. You there, what do you think? You freeze? About what, Domina? About Gaius Octavius marrying that girl from the market stalls. You blink. This is a trap. You say yes, and you offend the senator's niece. You say no, and you insult the merchant guild. You go with diplomacy. I've heard she bakes excellent honey cakes. Domina, and every good marriage needs sweetness. There's a pause. Then, mercifully, laughter. You're clever, one says. For a sponge boy. You bow. You try not to visibly sigh with relief. You've survived a social minefield, using pastry metaphors. The day continues. The gossip group disperses eventually, their seats vacated in synchronized elegance. You sweep the floor. You find 3 fig pits, 1 hairpin, and something that might be a fish scale. You don't ask questions. And then you hear a different sound. Not gossip, not digestion, something heavier. Footsteps. 4 of them, metal on stone. You look up. 2 soldiers enter, both in full armor, which is already a red flag because no sane man wears full lorica segmentata into a latrine unless he's hiding from someone or something. They stomp in like they're preparing to sack the place. One nods at you. We need a place to sit, privately. You gesture to the last 2 seats down the line. They take them without removing their helmets. You try not to watch, but it's hard not to notice that they're both still wearing swords. One of them lets out a sigh that sounds like war crimes and sweat. The other mutters, I hate the sand. You step back into the shadows. If someone's about to be assassinated mid evacuation, you'd like to not be in the splash zone. But nothing happens. They finish, stand, leave, no word, no tip, just the scent of leather, steel, and unresolved trauma. You mop slowly, hoping that's the weirdest thing you'll see today. It's not, because next in is an old man, barefoot, shirtless, covered in what looks like flour. He smiles. Do you know where the baker went? You shake your head. He nods, chooses a seat, and begins humming. You try not to inhale too deeply. The flour might be the least strange thing about him. He pulls out a lemon, begins chewing it. Whole. You mop faster. You don't ask. Later, when the old man leaves, you find he's drawn a perfect circle on the floor with flour and written Vini in it. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether this was early performance art or just undiagnosed heat stroke. You are past caring. You clean the circle. Again, the sun begins to lower. The gossip fades. The marble cools slightly. And for one brief moment, the latrine is quiet. You almost relax. Then you hear a splash from the next room. A splash followed by screaming. You grab the mop like a sword, the bucket like a shield, and rush toward destiny. Because you know, with dread in your gut, someone has slipped. And you, sponge wielder of the realm, must restore order once more. You burst through the archway into the adjoining chamber and immediately regret everything about your existence. The scene is as tragic as it is slippery. A man, mid-30s, toga askew, and dignity clearly left behind, lies sprawled across the marble floor like a particularly confused jellyfish. One leg is half in the footbath. The other is tangled in what appears to be a stray tunic sash. His sandals are in opposite corners of the room. And beside him, like a monument to poor decisions, is an overturned amphora of olive oil. You take a cautious step forward. It's slick, dangerous. One more wrong move, and you'll be joining him in an unplanned toga tangle of doom. He groans theatrically. I slipped, he moans. You nod solemnly. Yes, sir. That much is clear. He squints at you through sweaty curls. I was oiling myself for moisture, of course. And grace, he adds. I wanted to glide into the caldarium like Neptune himself. You glance at the puddle. It's less Neptune and more fried anchovy. You set down the vinegar bucket and begin the cautious, meticulous process of cleaning up a man-shaped oil spill. As you mop around him, he narrates his woes. Poor digestion, ungrateful nephews, a wax statue of himself that melted in last summer's heat wave. Somewhere in the middle of this, you realize he's not getting up. Not on his own. You extend your hand. He takes it. You immediately regret it, because he's still oiled. Your grip slips. He flails. You flail. You both nearly go down. The bucket wobbles violently, and somehow, by some ancient miracle, rights itself. Eventually, with a noise resembling a walrus escaping from a wine barrel, he stands. Thank you, he says with exaggerated gravity. You have the soul of a senator. You wipe your hand on your tunic, which at this point is more absorbent than you'd like to admit. Back in the latrine, your lunch has turned into a rock in your pouch. You nibble it anyway, because hunger is hunger and dignity died 3 hours ago. You finally sit, just for a moment, on the edge of the vinegar shelf. Your spine clicks. Your knees whisper curses. Your soul exhales. Then from the corridor, clomp, clomp, clomp. Heavy footsteps, rhythmic, intentional. You squint. Enter A man in full ceremonial armor, not a soldier, not anymore. A retired decorated veteran, judging by the silver crests on his shoulders and the absolutely absurd helmet plume now brushing the top of the archway. He salutes you. You salute back before you realize what you're doing. He stands at the latrine entrance, arms behind his back, surveying the room like he's about to lead it into battle. Then he speaks. I need to be escorted to the third seat on the left. It was my favorite when I was posted here 20 years ago. You nod, because this is not a man you argue with. You walk beside him like a junior officer. He marches proudly, his sandals echoing like a parade. Patrons step aside, slightly afraid. He reaches the seat. He sits. He groans, but not like everyone else groans. This is a groan of triumph. Still firm, he says, patting the marble lovingly, like the old days. You stand to the side, half guard, half sponge valet. Then he begins to reminisce. You know, we once chased a Gaul through the streets of this district. He hid in the bathhouse. We found him soaking with the laundry women. Smart fellow. You smile politely. Got away too, he says, clearly still impressed. Slippery man, possibly oiled. You wonder briefly if it was the same man from earlier. The one currently glistening somewhere near the caldarium. The veteran finishes, stands, and nods at you. You've done well, son. You keep this place disciplined. You look at the sponge in your hand and the puddle of vinegar at your feet. Discipline might be generous. He hands you a small token, a bronze coin pierced with a hole. For valor, he says, and marches out with his plume high and his back straight. You add the coin to your collection. It now officially outweighs your faith in humanity. As you turn to clean the seat, a shriek echoes from the hallway. Not a scream of pain, a shriek of indignation. You sigh. A woman storms in, holding what looks like a sandal in one hand and a half-peeled onion in the other. She waves both like weapons. Someone stole my basket, she declares. You blink. In the latrine? It was right outside the door, she huffs. It had figs, and my second best shawl, and this. She holds up the onion like it's sacred. You nod sympathetically, because people yelling about onions rarely want logic. I demand justice, she cries. You offer her the lost and found crate. She dives into it like a lion into a goat pile, pulls out a chipped cup, 2 unmatched sandals, a spoon, and a small statue of Jupiter with a missing nose. None of these are mine, she growls. I believe you, you say. Eventually, she stomps off, muttering something about curses and poor security. You glance down. She left the onion. You consider keeping it, not out of hunger, but as a symbol. Of what? You're not sure. Maybe absurdity, maybe vengeance. You return to your post just as a group of young men wander in, still dripping from the frigidarium, laughing and shoving each other like satyrs on festival wine. They're loud, they're fast, and they're ignoring the no diving into the cistern sign. One of them grabs a sponge stick and pretends it's a sword. En garde, he cries, swiping at another's legs. You step in. Gentlemen, please. The sponge is not a weapon. It could be, one grins. You frown. They pause. One of them mutters, we'll go splash the massage guy instead. And just like that, they're gone. You collapse onto the supply crate again. It creaks. You creak. Everything creaks. Outside, the light is shifting. Afternoon stretches its golden fingers across the columns. Soon, the evening shift will roll in. The philosophers, the gladiators, the mysterious man who never speaks but always tips in figs. You inhale. The air still smells like vinegar and fate. But you're ready. Probably. Maybe. Evening begins its slow descent over the eternal city, and the bathhouse softens. The light pouring in from the high windows grows amber, casting long, contemplative shadows across the now damp floor. You allow yourself one breath, just one, that isn't interrupted by screaming, vinegar, or someone's violently digested lentils. But the quiet is short lived. It always is. You hear it before you see it. The unmistakable sound of water doing something it should not be doing. A thick glug glug gurgle from the eastern side of the latrine. A noise that combines the threatening cheer of boiling stew with the cadence of a man clearing his throat while being strangled. You mutter a curse in Latin, a soft one, a respectful one, the kind you might offer the gods when politely asking them not to drown you in sewage. The eastern drain is backing up. Again, you grab your mop and your bucket and approach with caution, the way one might approach a slumbering bear or a wine merchant you forgot to pay. Sure enough, the water level has risen ominously. It bubbles gently, like it's thinking about something terrible. The smell changes subtly, like old shoes and something philosophical. You kneel and prod the grate. Nothing happens. You jab again, and the water belches. And then, there it is, the swirl. A fat dark circle of liquid despair rising slowly to the surface. You back up instinctively. This is not a clog. This is a warning. You sprint to the closet and grab the rod. The rod, once again, is your long, coiled bronze companion, part plumber's tool, part trauma stick. You unravel it with a sigh and begin the dance of the desperate. Crouch, twist, jab, pray. You push the rod into the drain as far as it will go. Something resists, something stubborn, something that, judging by the vibration, might be alive. You keep going. A sudden pop, a blast of pressure, and then, whoomp! A wave of foul liquid shoots upward in protest, splattering the walls and, yes, your knees. The drain gurgles like a dying senator and begins to flow again, reluctantly. You've saved the latrine. You've also ruined your last clean patch of tunic. You mop mechanically, your eyes distant. This isn't your first drain trauma. It won't be your last. You make a mental note to burn your sandals later, just in case. The pipe seems clear now, but you know better. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer herself, is always watching. She breathes through these grates like some slumbering leviathan, and every now and then she hiccups. And when she hiccups, you clean it. You step outside for a breath. Not far, just to the vestibule where the air tastes marginally less like despair. There, you find another surprise. The ladle, your backup ladle to be precise, missing since yesterday, currently being used by a street performer to balance olives on his nose. You approach. Excuse me, that's a latrine ladle. The performer grins. No, no, friend. It's a prop. Look. He bounces 3 olives, juggles them, catches one in his mouth. The crowd applauds. You point again. It was in the drain. Today. He pauses, olive halfway to his mouth, then hands you the ladle with 2 fingers. Suddenly less thrilled. You take it. You don't thank him. You toss it straight into the vinegar and say a quiet prayer for its lost innocence. You return to the latrine to find it quiet again. A rare lull. You allow yourself the tiniest slouch against the sponge cabinet. Your spine sends a thank you note to your knees. You are halfway to pretending you don't exist when a familiar face walks in. It's Gaius, the local philosopher. Shirt slightly too small, beard slightly too long, opinions definitely too loud. He carries a scroll titled On the Moral Implications of Defecation. He's smiling. You want to run, you don't. He sits, third seat from the left, always, and immediately begins. You know, he says, this place is the perfect metaphor for society. You nod. because the only thing worse than listening is arguing. The way waste flows downward, he continues, gesturing with one hand while the other adjusts his toga, mirrors the corruption in the Senate. You continue mopping slowly as he talks. It's all connected. Power, waste, decay. The cycle of civilization begins here. The latrine is where Rome's soul goes to reflect. You look at him. Sir, you're sitting on it. He laughs, genuinely. Exactly. He stands. Too quickly. The scroll drops into the hole. There's a pause. Then, you stare at the hole. He stares at you. Do you? He begins. You already have the ladle. He claps you on the back. You're a hero of the Republic. You retrieve the scroll. Smells faintly of vinegar and lost dreams. He tucks it back into his satchel like it didn't just tour the underworld. He leaves humming a tune from some tragic play. You sit again, just for a moment. And then the gladiators arrive. Of course they do. 4 of them. Towering, sweaty, still in their leather gear. One of them is missing a tooth. Another has a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. They each choose a seat with the deliberation of a man choosing a shield. The noise begins instantly. Not just the usual sounds of digestion, but volume, commentary, grunts, musical sighs. Someone starts humming again, but this time it's rhythmic. One slaps his knee, another slaps the wall. You offer them the sponge. They inspect it like a weapon. Ever used one in a fight? The toothless one asks. You nod. Only when desperate. They laugh. The scarred one winks. You've got guts. Not many do. He tips you a coin. A real one. Silver. You pretend not to cry. They finish. Leave. Still humming. Still loud. The seats cool again. You breathe. Then a voice calls out, "We're out of vinegar." Of course you are. Because of course you are. You pick up the bucket. Your legs scream. Your back revolts. Your soul slides off somewhere near Carthage. You march toward the storage room and wonder, not for the first time, what did people in Gaul do for toilets? You trudge toward the storage room like a condemned man heading for his final amphora. Each step echoes down the hallway with a soft squelch because your sandals, once noble, once a proud product of genuine Roman craftsmanship, are now essentially sponges strapped to your feet. You used to have dreams. Now you just have foot mildew. The vinegar jugs stand in a line along the back wall like sentries of acrid purity. You choose the least dusty one and begin pouring it into your bucket. The fumes rise instantly, biting your nose and stinging your eyes like a slap from an angry grape. This stuff is strong, possibly illegal in some provinces. It could clean marble or ruin marriages, depending on the dilution. You haul it back through the labyrinthine bathhouse, weaving through men in towels, boys with loofahs, and one woman loudly trying to convince a slave to sell her their earrings. You arrive at the latrine just in time to witness an accident. A child. Always a child. He looks about 5 years old and is standing beside, not in, mind you, the latrine. There is a puddle, a shameful, steaming puddle. The child looks extremely proud of himself. Did it all by myself, he says cheerfully. You resist the urge to salute him. His mother enters seconds later and gasps dramatically, like a Greek chorus with better sandals. Oh gods. Oh no. That's not how this is done. You nod politely and hand her a cloth. She recoils as though it's on fire. I thought you would, she waves vaguely toward the puddle, as though hoping it will vanish if she gestures hard enough. You do what must be done. You mop again. The puddle vanishes. The smell lingers. The mother drops a coin into your bucket without looking. You glance at it. It's a washer. From a curtain. Possibly. No time to grieve. because now enters him. The minor magistrate, you know him, everyone knows him. He has a beard that is somehow both too short and too long, a voice like overcooked turnips, and a permanent sneer of someone unimpressed by absolutely everything. He points at you. You. You're the cleaner. Yes, sir. I brought my son today. Teach him about public service. You nod, unsure what exactly he expects. The boy stands beside him, wide-eyed, wearing a tunic far too nice for this place. He has a scroll, and a nose that already looks down on people. Observe, the magistrate says, the underbelly of civilization. You're not sure whether to bow or bark. The magistrate begins to lecture, loudly, while relieving himself, a true Roman multitasker. Virtue begins with cleanliness, he says. Discipline starts with the bowels. The republic, like the colon, must remain unobstructed. You mop slowly nearby, wondering how many metaphors one man can force into a bathroom. He finishes, doesn't use the sponge, doesn't tip. His son stares at you. What do you do when someone poops on the floor? You stare back. I clean it. He nods solemnly, as though you've just explained Stoic philosophy. Is there ever a time when you just leave it? You consider the question. It's deep, almost profound. Only in times of war, you reply. He writes this down. Later, you find a scroll abandoned near the vinegar shelf titled My Day Among the Filth Folk. You save it for future dramatic readings at the tavern. As the sun begins to lower, the air changes. The light grows longer, stretching shadows across the marble. The smell changes too, not better, just different. Like the ghosts of beings past are stretching their legs. You're cleaning the edges of the bench when someone whispers your name. You turn. It's old Marcus. He doesn't come often anymore. Walks with a cane. Smells of pine resin and wet wool. He used to be a librarian. Now he mostly mutters things about conspiracy and cheese. He smiles. A tooth is missing. Possibly more. I brought you something, he says. You blink. He pulls out a fresh sponge. New, untied, unsullied, fluffy. It's beautiful. You take it like it's a relic. Found it near the docks, he says. Thought of you. You're not sure if that's flattering, but you don't care. You tie it onto a fresh stick with reverence. The others, the older sponge sticks, seem to grumble quietly in the bucket. You spend a moment testing the new one. It soaks well, swirls beautifully, like a cloud of second chances. And then, of course, someone yells, a voice from the doorway. You, Custodia, there's something in the drain. You raise an eyebrow. Something alive. You grab your mop. You grab your bucket. You grab the ladle. Because this is not your first drain creature. You march toward the voice. There's a crowd gathered around the eastern grate. You approach slowly. You crouch. You listen. Gurgle. Gurgle. Snort. You see movement. And then a turtle. A small, confused sewer turtle. Blinking up at you like, what did I do to deserve this? The crowd gasps. One woman screams. A child tries to name it. You reach in, gently, carefully, and lift it out. The turtle blinks. It is, without question, the cleanest living thing you've touched all day. You place it gently in a bucket and set it outside in the courtyard. It turns slowly, crawls toward freedom. You watch it go. You wipe your hands. You go back inside. You return to your post. You dip the new sponge in fresh vinegar, and you whisper to yourself, one more hour. Because every day, no matter what, there's always one more hour. The sun is low now, really low. The last strands of daylight are barely clinging to the bathhouse walls, like laundry someone forgot to bring in before the rain. The marble glows with a tired yellow light, and the air inside the latrine has officially given up, pretending to be breathable. This is the part of the day you dread, the stink hour, It's not just the heat anymore, it's the culmination, the grand finale. Every drop of sweat, every flick of vinegar, every unholy accident of the day, baked, soaked, and swirled together like Rome's worst casserole. The marble under your feet is no longer cool. It's radiating heat like a vengeful sun god. The bucket of vinegar you just topped off is beginning to hiss. That's right, hiss. You fan your tunic. Useless. You lean against the wall for a second. It sweats back. Someone enters. He's shirtless, pink from the caldarium, dripping like a rotisserie chicken, and he smells like eucalyptus, which, while technically better than the usual, now mixes with the general funk to produce something that could best be described as spa disaster. He grunts at you. You hand him the sponge stick like a weary priest presenting a relic. He takes it without eye contact, uses it, and drops it on the ground. Just drops it. You close your eyes. You count to 10. You pick it up. You don't say a word, because you know what comes next. The shifts swell. They come in waves, always around this time. Everyone who's avoided the bathhouse all day, hoping the crowds will have died down. Spoiler, they haven't. It starts with the laborers. Big guys, calloused hands, shouting across seats like they're at a market stall. Get the sponge when you're done with it. I didn't touch your tunic, you drunken donkey. Then the musicians. One of them has a flute and absolutely no boundaries. He's playing it while sitting. You know where he's sitting. And yes, you guessed it. He drops the flute. You retrieve it. You don't ask. Then, the two men who think it's hilarious to pretend this is a race. 1, 2, go. Grunting, laughing, splashing. You hear a slap. You pray it was a thigh. You're sweating in places that didn't used to exist. Behind your knees, inside your ears, emotionally. And the smell, it's no longer a smell per se. It's more like a presence, like a visiting spirit made of garlic, regret, and ancient plumbing. You mop. You dip the sponge. You dip your soul in vinegar. And then, just as you're about to slip into a coma of repetition, someone new enters. A man dressed too nicely to be here. Toga spotless, sandals polished, rings on every finger, including at least one toe, which is both fashion forward and horrifying. He walks in with the air of someone who's never had to clean up after himself. You recognize him. Everyone does. He's that guy. A local noble with a name that sounds like sneezing. He doesn't use the sponge. He brings his own, carried by a servant. He sits, adjusts, snaps his fingers. You look up. Fan me, he says. You hesitate. He points at the rag near the vinegar jugs. You sigh, you fan. He nods approvingly. Excellent wrist motion. You've done this before. You have. Not that you'll admit it. He prattles on about grain prices, his latest poetry, his new mosaic floor, which he says feels like walking on clouds that resent you slightly. You nod. You fan. You resist the urge to throw vinegar in his general direction. When he finishes, he leaves his private sponge behind. You stare at it. It's monogrammed. You don't know whether to burn it or auction it. And then, as always, it happens. You hit the wall, not a real one. The shift wall. That moment when your knees threaten mutiny and your spine becomes a series of unpleasant questions. Your vision goes soft at the edges. You forget your own name. You briefly believe you are, in fact, the sponge. You sit. You drink from your water pouch. It tastes faintly of vinegar now. You don't care. A rat scurries past. You nod at it like an old friend. And then, through the haze, you see him, the other custodia, from the fancier bathhouse. He's walking past the archway. His tunic? White. His mop? Polished wood with bristles that look New. His face? Smug. So smug. You make eye contact. He nods once. You nod back. This is not a rivalry. This is war. He disappears down the hallway, and you look at your own tools. Splintered stick, bucket with a chip the size of Sicily, sponge held together with hope and string. You sigh, then you return to your post, because someone's approaching. Slowly, limply. He's elderly, bald, dressed like he got lost on the way to a temple. He leans on the bench and says, "Can you help me sit?" You do. Carefully, gently, like handling a sacred scroll. He sighs and pats your hand. "You're a good boy." You nod. "I was a custodia once," he says. "In the old days, when the vinegar was stronger and the marble was colder." You blink. "Really?" He smiles. "I lasted 3 days." He finishes and stands. Wobbles. Smiles again. "I see you've made it longer." He hobbles out. You stare after him. 3 days. And here you are. Day 74. Maybe 75. You're not sure anymore. The air has cooled slightly now. Outside, the stars are rising over Rome. Inside, the latrine glows in torchlight. You clean the sponge. You straighten the shelf. You sweep the fig pits from the corners. You sit on the supply crate. You breathe. It still smells terrible, but somehow it smells familiar. The torchlight flickers, casting long, shaky shadows on the damp walls. The bathhouse is officially in its twilight phase. Not quiet, not busy, but buzzing with that strange late evening energy where everyone is slightly damp, slightly tired, and somehow still managing to argue about figs. You sit for exactly 47 seconds. That's how long it takes before the night shift truly begins. A young couple bursts through the archway laughing, whispering, both tipsy and far too comfortable with public displays of affection. She's carrying her sandals in one hand. He's not carrying anything, because clearly she's the responsible one. They pause at the latrine entrance. "Do you have a private stall?" she asks. You blink. "This is a Roman public bath, Domina. You're lucky if you get a seat that doesn't whistle." They giggle. She leans against the marble. He does not. He's still unsure if sitting is sexy. They take too long. The line grows. Behind them, a scribe coughs, passive aggressively. A merchant sighs. A baker mutters dark things about teenage love and communal plumbing. Eventually they go, together. You don't ask questions. When they leave, the seat smells like wine and bad decisions. You mop. You vinegar. You try not to sigh audibly. Then the twins return. Not the gossip twins. The actual twins. Identical. About 9 years old. Agents of chaos. God's practical joke. They charge in like they own the place, racing to claim the best seat. Middle bench, under the vent. "I got here first," shouts one. "No, I did," shouts the other. They both sit, at the same time, on the same seat. There's a thud, a squawk, a tangle of elbows and knees, and then a soft splat that suggests someone forgot to wait. You do not react. You've cleaned worse, much worse. They argue for 15 more minutes, only pausing to hurl fig pits at a beetle near the door. You consider asking them to leave. You also consider faking your own death. Eventually, their nursemaid arrives and drags them off, one under each arm. They're still bickering. You swear you hear the words "poop royalty." You clean their seat. Again. And just when you think the floor might finally dry, you hear a distant voice. "Ave Latrina," it sings. You close your eyes. It's him, the amateur poet. He's back. He's written more. He marches in with scrolls in both hands and a theatrical flourish that suggests he once failed out of oratory school but never got the memo. I have composed a new work, he announces. It is titled An Ode to My Inner Aqueduct. A groan echoes from someone behind a pillar. You attempt to vanish into the wall. He perches himself delicately on the edge of the bench, like he's about to birth a masterpiece. He begins to read. In through coils and curves my torment flows, in steamy halls where marble glows. You mop quietly nearby. In chambers deep where mortals strain, I battle figs and gout and pain. You turn away. A river's wrath, my inner plight, a thunderstorm by candlelight. The poem continues. It has 10 verses. You know because you counted. Silently, while scraping dried wax from a torch sconce. He finishes, bows to the nearly empty latrine, and drops a scroll in your vinegar bucket as a tip. You fish it out. It's slightly soggy. You add it to your growing collection of scrolls no one ever asked for. And then finally, a short silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The kind that says, for just a moment, the bathhouse is at peace. You breathe. And then thunder, not weather, feet. Someone is running. You poke your head out of the archway, just in time to see a boy streaking past, entirely nude, chased by a very angry man with a sandal raised like a weapon. He stole my soap, the man shouts. The boy disappears into the steam. You blink. You step back inside. Not your problem. At least not yet. You're mopping again when an older woman enters, dignified, quiet, and surprisingly serene. She nods to you. You've kept it clean today, she says, settling onto a bench. You nod. I've done what I can, she sighs. I remember when this place was new, when the grout between the tiles was still white. You don't doubt it. She's the kind of woman who remembers things, important things, like family recipes or how to bury a body without leaving a trace. You know, she continues, people think this job is beneath them. You raise an eyebrow. But I think, she says, you're the only one here who's seen everyone for who they really are. She stands, brushes off her robe, and leaves. You blink. Did she just compliment you? Or imply you know too much? Both? Either way, your spine straightens a little. You mop a bit more proudly, and then a pigeon flies in. You don't know how. You don't know why. It lands on a torch bracket and stares at you. Then it poops directly into the vinegar bucket. You stare. It stares back. You sigh, dump the bucket, start again, because that's what you do. Every time, no matter what. You rinse out the vinegar bucket with water from the cistern, watching as the pigeon's unsolicited offering spirals away like your hope for a short evening. The bucket now smells like wet marble and betrayal. You refill it slowly, carefully, as if respect alone might prevent future aerial attacks. When you return to the latrine, the pigeon is gone. Good. You half expected to come back with friends and declare roosting rights. You resume your post. Your feet ache with a dull throb. Your knees now make a sound you've started calling the Roman crunch. Then a familiar creak. Old Gellius. He visits twice a week. He's 103. Or so he claims. He also claims he once wrestled a wolf with nothing but a ladle and determination, so you take it with a grain of salt. He moves slow, like a statue remembering how to walk. His tunic is threadbare. His belt is a piece of rope. His coin pouch jingles with the sound of pebbles and dreams. You help him to his usual seat, the far end, near the crack in the wall where sunlight used to leak in. Back when the empire was young and bathhouses had hopes. He grunts as he lowers himself. You know, he says, squinting at nothing, when I was young, we didn't have vinegar, just salt water and good intentions. You nod. He says this every time. I fought at Actium, he adds. You nod again. He sits for 10 minutes, doesn't move, doesn't speak, then stands, Didn't need to go, he says, patting your arm. Just wanted to remember what silence felt like. You smile. He hobbles out. And then chaos returns. A gaggle of boys, 10, maybe 12, rush in, fresh from the palastra, hair dripping, voices cracking. They're loud. They're shirtless. They're absolutely covered in mud. No, not mud. You don't want to know. They grab sticks, your sticks, and begin a mock battle. One declares himself emperor of the eastern latrine. Another declares war. You intervene, gently, firmly. They scatter, mostly. One lingers to ask if the sponge has a name. You say, not officially. He suggests Pupus Maximus. You don't laugh. Out loud. They leave a trail of water, grime, and something you really hope is clay. You mop. Again. Always again. Then in comes the perfume man. You've never known his real name. He wears layers of scent like armor, each one distinct, each one louder than the last. Today it's myrrh, patchouli, and something that smells like roasted fennel. He nods to you, doesn't speak, he never does. He sits, exhales, and suddenly the entire room smells like a burning herbalist shop. You fan the air discreetly with your tunic. He doesn't notice. He finishes, stands, and leaves a small vial behind. Amber glass, stoppered, with beeswax. You pick it up. It says in tiny script, to cleanse what cannot be unseen. You don't know if it's a gift or a warning. You put it in your pouch next to the turtle scroll and the cursed coin. By now, the torchlight is stronger. Shadows dance across the ceiling. The latrine is half empty, and for a moment, things settle. Until, of course, they don't. A man stumbles in, clearly drunk, toga off one shoulder, sandals untied, eyes spinning like dice. He makes it halfway to the bench, pauses, turns to you, and says, I think I left my dignity in here 3 days ago. You blink. Have you seen it? You smile. We keep it next to the vinegar. He laughs, wheezes, sits, and promptly begins singing a song about lost youth and ungrateful goats. You mop around him. He hums, occasionally cries. Eventually he stands, pats your shoulder, hands you a fig. Don't let Rome get to you, he says. She'll chew you up and spit you out smelling like onions and shame. You nod, he leaves. You eat the fig. It's surprisingly good. And then, a miracle. The noble woman returns, the one with the complaints. But this time, she smiles. She enters, uses the sponge without a lecture, and even nods toward you as she leaves. You've kept it tidy, she says, for a public facility. You blink. That's the Roman equivalent of a standing ovation. You barely have time to process the moment when something even more incredible happens. A tip from a senator. Real money. Actual silver. You stare at it. You bite it. It's not wax. You add it to your pouch. It glows faintly next to the beeswax vial and the lint-covered pebble someone once called lucky. And just like that, the shift enters its golden hour. Not in light, in mood. The latrine is still gross, still noisy, still smells like a mixture of vinegar and hard choices. But it's quieter, warmer, almost peaceful. You sit, you breathe. The sponge rests beside you, soaking gently. The mop leans on your shoulder like a friend. You are tired, but you are still here. And then, because the universe respects neither pacing nor mercy, the gladiators return. Not the same ones from earlier. These are bigger, louder, smellier. One ducks under the archway, muscles rippling like he's wrestling the air. Another carries a sack of olives and zero concern for your freshly mopped floor. The third has a lion tattooed across his chest, roaring across an expanse of scars and oil. You tighten your grip on the mop handle. The biggest one spots you, points. Hey, it's the sponge general. You blink. The what? You command the stink troops. He laughs, slapping you on the back. so hard your soul briefly exits your body. The others laugh. One tries to juggle 3 sponge sticks, fails, drops 2. The third lands in someone's vinegar bucket. They spread out across the benches, like conquering heroes claiming their thrones. One sits with a groan so loud it scares a mouse out of the corner. Another starts whistling a marching tune. The third begins peeling olives and tossing the pits on the floor. You step forward. Please don't. He looks at you, then at the pit, then eats the next olive with the pit just to prove a point. You sigh. The smell in the room shifts. Sweat, leather, raw onion, and something that might be fear. Possibly yours. The lion chest guy pulls out a scroll. I wrote a poem, he declares. You wince. Not again. He clears his throat. Steel and sponge, blood and bench. To fart is human, but to wipe, divine. The other 2 cheer. One of them slaps the wall in applause, knocking loose a piece of decorative tile. You don't stop them, because at this point, you've realized something important. Gladiators do not respond well to being told to lower their voices, or clean up their olive pits, or anything really. They finish. Slowly, loudly. One of them mimes throwing a sponge like a discus. You intervene before he tests his form on the east wall. They rise. They nod at you. You keep this place honorable, Lion Chest says. You nod back. I do what I can. He tosses you a coin, bronze, with teeth marks. You're not sure if they're his. And then they leave, taking the smell of courage and cabbage with them. You exhale. You mop. Again. Always again. Then a young man enters. Quiet, well dressed, a scroll tucked under his arm. He doesn't say much, just picks a seat, settles in, and begins to sketch. You squint. Is he drawing the latrine? Yes, yes, he is. He sees you watching and nods. I'm studying the civic architecture of communal spaces, he says. As if that explains anything, you tilt your head. I like the lines, he adds, gesturing to the curve of the bench and the shadow of the cistern. You nod. Slowly, he sketches in silence. A philosopher in charcoal and chalk dust. He leaves without using the sponge, or the bench, or anything really, just a sketch, which he hands to you on the way out. You look at it. It's beautiful, surprisingly accurate, and you, somehow, look heroic, standing with mop in hand like a sentinel of sanitation. You fold it, tuck it in your pouch, between the beeswax vial and the fig someone dropped earlier and forgot. Then an old man stumbles in, holding a fish. Yes, a fish. You don't ask. He sits. He talks to the fish. You sweep around him gently, carefully avoiding his sandal and the fish's tail. Eventually he nods, stands, and leaves, saying, "Thank you. She needed the air. You don't know what's real anymore. But you do know that if a man wants to walk his fish, you're not the one to stop him." And then, once more, the poet returns, the young one. Different from the inner aqueduct guy, this one has dreamy eyes and terrible posture. He kneels beside the bench and declares, "I have composed something for the sponge." You brace yourself. He recites, "O sponge, gentle moon of midnight's tide, you cleanse the shame that men would hide." You stop listening after that. You're busy wondering if this sponge has now become a muse. At the end, he bows deeply, leaves a tiny scroll titled "To the Bristle, Soft Love of Latrine Life." You tuck it in your collection, right between Ode to the Cistern and an elegy for my colon. Time creeps toward night. The torchlight grows lazy. The echo of sandals on marble becomes less frequent, more hesitant. And then you hear something unexpected, singing, soft, melodic, in Greek. You step into the hallway. It's the massage girl from the adjoining room. She's finishing for the night, scrubbing her hands and humming An old lullaby. She sees you, smiles. You're still here? You nod. Always. She laughs. You deserve a temple. You shake your head. Just a new sponge. She tosses you a fig. Close enough. And disappears down the hallway like a dream wrapped in olive oil and cracked joints. You sit again. The bench feels softer than usual, or maybe your body has finally merged with the fatigue. You reach into your pouch, pull out the sketch, the poem, the lucky pebble. You smile. The sponge rests nearby, still damp, still upright, still faithful, like you. And somewhere, beyond the walls, Rome hums on, wild, ridiculous, alive. You don't know how long you've been sitting. Long enough for the vinegar to settle. Long enough for the torch beside you to flicker a little lower. And long enough for the familiar smell of something slightly burnt to reach your nose. You sniff. Yes, definitely. Toasted linen? You stand slowly. Creak, stretch, groan. You follow the scent toward the bench nearest the torch bracket. There you find it, a half-charred towel. Someone, presumably trying to dry it too close to the flame, has abandoned it mid-singed. The edge is curled like a roasted scroll. You poke it with your mop. Still warm. You sigh. Douse it with water from your pouch. It hisses like a disappointed senator. You wrap it in a cloth, set it aside for laundering, and make a mental note. Torch drying towels. Bad. You return to your station only to find a tersorium missing. You blink. You had 6. You now have 5. This is not acceptable. You check the vinegar bucket. No. The replacement pile. No. You glance down the hall, and then you hear it. The slap slap of sponge on skin. You turn the corner, only to find a boy, about 14, brandishing your missing sponge stick like a sword and chasing another boy across the atrium. The pursued is laughing. The pursuer is yelling, I name this the staff of Jupiter's judgment. You chase after them. You do not yell. You just walk with intense Roman purpose. You retrieve the sponge, gently, with the weariness of someone who's seen too much. Return of the judgment stick, the boy proclaims, before disappearing behind the caldarium steam cloud. You mop your way back. The sponge, thankfully, is intact. But now you wonder, did it pass through hands unwashed? You dip it back in vinegar. Twice. You sit again. A man passes, glances at the sponge, and mutters, I've seen worse weapons. You nod. You really have. Later, an older custodia, not from your bathhouse, but another district, pokes his head in. He's short, bald, carries a broom like it's his best friend. Just checking, he says. Have you seen a terracotta footstool come through here? You blink. That's specific. He nods. One of our patrons said it vanished mid-soak. Thought it might have floated down the drain. You both share a silent moment of contemplation. Could be in the cloaca, you offer. He sighs. If it is, it's Neptune's now. He leaves. You're still thinking about that footstool when someone screams. Not a loud scream. More of a surprised, you rush toward the source. A young woman, very pregnant, is standing near the third bench. I dropped my ring, she says. You nod. Down the hole. Of course she did. You reach for your ladle. She stops you. No, wait, it's magical. You blink. Blessed by Bonadea herself for fertility. You look at the hole. You look at her. You do not argue. You retrieve it. It's surprisingly shiny for something that's now traveled deeper into the latrine than most senators' dignity. She clasps it. Thanks you. Hands you a dry date. You've guaranteed a safe delivery, she says. You consider framing the date. You don't. You eat it. It's not bad. The night deepens. The candles along the upper arches flicker and sway, and the scholars enter. Not many, just 2. They come late, always late. One always forgets his sandals. The other always forgets his pants. They settle in opposite corners and begin a heated debate about Roman aqueduct design echoing off the tile. You mop around them cautiously. Their discussion reaches a crescendo. Concrete is eternal, one cries. The other shouts back, but limestone sings. You back away slowly. You've learned not to get between philosophy and digestion. They eventually leave, one quoting Cicero, the other limping because he forgot he had stepped on a fig earlier. Then, for a heartbeat, the bathhouse is still. Truly still. No one enters. No one yells. No new smell announces itself with flourish. You wipe down the benches. You restock the vinegar. You organize the sponge sticks by length and splinter severity. You take a breath. You're about to close your eyes when a young girl tiptoes in, carrying a basket of herbs. She's not a patron. She's a cleaner's daughter. She sets the basket beside you, wordless, and smiles. Inside, sprigs of mint, fresh lavender, a single clove of garlic. Papa says you work the hardest, she says. You nod. She leaves. You pick up a piece of mint. You hold it under your nose. You close your eyes, and you smile. The mint under your nose is doing the impossible, momentarily eclipsing the omnipresent funk of vinegar, sweat, and everything the latrine has suffered today. You savor it like a stolen moment, which it is. And then the quiet breaks. You hear it first, a low guttural grunt, followed by a clank. Then, definitively, a splash. You rise slowly. This is not the splash of something minor. This is the splash of a full-grown Roman hitting the wrong end of his evening. You walk toward the sound, sponge stick in hand, like a night watchman, with a very low standard of emergencies. You round the corner and behold the scene. A man, large, bearded, clearly drunk, has fallen into the basin of the washroom adjacent to the latrine, the one used for foot rinsing and, occasionally, dramatic arguments. He blinks up at you, half submerged, arms sprawled, toga flapping gently like a wet curtain. I live here now, he says. You nod. Do you need help getting out? I need olives, he replies, not moving. You help him up anyway. It's like hauling a sack of wet wool stuffed with ambition. He clings to you like a sad barnacle. You finally get him standing. He pats your head. You're very mop-like. He stumbles out. You drain the basin, clean the surrounding tiles, and find, inexplicably, a tiny wooden boat bobbing nearby. You have no explanation. You set it on the bench. It somehow feels symbolic. The rest of the night continues its slow descent into chaos. One man complains, the sponge smells too clean. Another insists the vinegar isn't sour enough for true cleansing. You listen. You nod. You do not commit any crimes. A local politician arrives next, flanked by two attendants. He refuses to touch anything, instead dictating instructions from the doorway like an emperor of bodily functions. 2 seats from the left, I demand silence and an escort to the sponge. You oblige. He uses it with the same gravity most men reserve for giving speeches in the Senate. When he's done, he tosses a small token at your feet, a carved ivory chip, likely worth more than your annual wages. It has a lion etched into it. You stare at it. You pick it up. You wonder briefly if this means you now own a lion. Later, the oldest woman you've ever seen appears in the threshold, hobbling. With the assistance of a broomstick she's repurposed into a walking cane. She doesn't speak. She points to a bench. You help her sit. She takes her time. When she finishes, she stands, nods once, and places a single raisin into your hand. No explanation. You eat it anyway. You're not sure if it's an offering or a threat. You sweep. You mop. You refresh the vinegar with an elegant flick of the wrist that could now qualify as muscle memory or low-level sorcery. At some point, a man walks in carrying a lyre. You assume this will go poorly, but he simply sits, plays a soft melody, relieves himself, and leaves, his music lingering like a scent that isn't terrible. You're about to mop the last tile when a small, shaggy dog wanders in. You pause. You make eye contact. He barks once, short, formal, then sniffs the bench legs. Then, very deliberately, lifts a leg on one of them. You rush over. Sir, this is not a latrine for canines. He barks again, clearly disagreeing. You shoo him gently. He trots off, unashamed, possibly offended. The bench smells like disappointment. You vinegar it, hard. Later, two lovers enter, giggling, whispering, daring each other to just try sitting on the same bench. You don't look up. You've heard this one before. You mop around them slowly until they either leave or become embarrassed enough to flee. They leave. You win. As night deepens, the bathhouse grows heavy. Not quiet, just tired. You sweep fig pits from the corners. You restack sponge sticks in height order. You fold 3 abandoned towels and 1 abandoned tunic. You do not question why someone left a tunic. You simply hope they had backup. Then a man walks in, barefoot, eyes wide, hair wild. He leans in close and whispers, "There's gold beneath this floor." You blink. "Is that so?" He nods rapidly. "Buried by Etruscans, hidden during the fires. I heard it." You nod. "Thanks for the tip." He leaves. You tap the floor with your mop, just in case. Then a boy enters, 12, maybe 13, alone. He walks quietly, carefully, sits, finishes, stands. On his way out, he says, "My dad did this job too." You pause. "Long time ago, before he left for the legions." You nod. He leaves. You stare at the sponge stick in your hand. Suddenly, it doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels inherited. The torchlight is lower now, the shadows longer, the echoes fewer. You walk the latrine one last time. You clean what's left. You check the vinegar. You set out 3 fresh sponges for tomorrow's shift. And then you sit, not on the bench, but on the stone by the door, your post, your corner, your throne. You sit there in the torchlight, surrounded by silence and soap scum, feeling, if not proud, then at least solid, grounded. You've earned that rare Roman luxury, stillness. But of course, stillness is never still for long. From the far end of the corridor comes the rhythmic tap of his staff, not hurried, not aimless. It's the confident pace of someone who walks like the gods owe them rent. You peer toward the archway just as a cloaked figure steps into view. He, or they, wears a dark hood, not common in a bathhouse, or in Rome. The robe looks Greek, the sandals Egyptian. The vibe? Slightly terrifying. He stops in front of the latrine, silent. You rise slowly. "Can I help you?" He doesn't answer. He produces a scroll from beneath his cloak and unrolls it. You half expect a spell. Instead, it's a list, handwritten, smudged, in Latin. At the top, inspection of public facilities, sanitation and order. Your blood runs cold. An inspector, the dreaded inspector, the man who once shut down the Aventine baths for an improper vinegar to filth ratio, who publicly shamed a custodia for leaving a sponge stick upright in the wrong jar, whose nickname is the plunger. You straighten your tunic. You hide the lucky pebble. You pretend the mop hasn't been splintered since Tiberius. He walks past you, slowly. He peers into the vinegar. He lifts a sponge with 2 fingers and sniffs it. He checks under a bench. You hold your breath. He scribbles. He approaches the water cistern and taps its rim. Low, he mutters. You nod. "I was just about to refill it." He stares at you. You smile with all the panic of a man hiding 3 broken ladles in a mouse-infested towel pile. Then he inspects the floor. You've scrubbed it 3 times tonight, maybe 4. And still, a small olive pit clings to a crack in the tile like a smug little barnacle. He kneels, pokes it, writes something. You whisper an apology to Jupiter. He finishes his notes, turns, says nothing, walks toward the exit. You exhale slowly. He stops, turns, flicks a tiny coin at you. You catch it. It's bronze, stamped with a sponge. The mark of adequacy. You have passed. Barely. You resist the urge to cry. You hide the coin deep in your pouch, next to the monogrammed sponge and the possibly magical fig. You return to your bench, and you sit until the final visitor of the night wanders in. She's small, ancient, and shaped like someone made entirely out of wool and spite. She carries a small sack and wears a crown of laurel leaves that might be made of celery. She looks at you and says, "Where's the philosopher's bench?" You point. She sits, removes a small tablet, and begins furiously scratching something into it. You don't interrupt. After a long time, she stands, walks to you, and hands you the tablet. On it, a list of the bathhouse's spirits. You blink. "The sponge has a name," she says. You nod. "Of course." She taps the mop. "That one is named Rodericus. Be kind to him." You promise. She leaves. You're now in possession of a haunted mop. And somehow, this makes perfect sense. The torch beside you flickers. You check the clock shadow on the wall. Only a few moments left before full closure. You begin the nightly wrap-up. Wipe the benchbacks. Stack the spare sponges. Empty the used vinegar into the external drain pit. Whisper thanks to the Cloaca Maxima, the goddess who both protects and tests you. Then you approach the small wooden boat left behind earlier. You've decided to keep it. Not for any real reason, just because it's yours now. You set it on a shelf above the vinegar jugs, right next to the scroll titled, "To My Inner Aqueduct." You place the haunted mop gently in its corner. Rodericus deserves rest too. The last torch dims. The moonlight filters faintly through a high grate. Rome sleeps, or tries to. You slide the door closed, not locked, just nudged. A bathhouse is never truly closed. You settle into the alcove near the threshold, your sleep spot. Not comfortable, but yours. You curl up in your cloak. You clutch the warm stone wall. You listen to the soft drip of water echoing from somewhere deep in the pipes. You wonder what tomorrow will bring. More figs? More gladiators? More poetry? Probably all three. You breathe in deeply. It smells like vinegar, yes, but also something else. Something like resilience. You close your eyes. Not all heroes wear togas. Some just carry a sponge. You wake before dawn. Not because you want to, but because the floor reminds you it was never designed for comfort. Your spine cracks like an old amphora. Your mouth tastes like dust and leftover vinegar dreams. The bathhouse is still mostly asleep, quiet, in that eerie Roman way where even silence hums. You sit up, stretch, rub your face. Your tunic now smells like at least 4 men who weren't you. You decide that's a problem for later. The first thing you do is check on Rodericus, the mop. Still upright, still solemn, still haunting the corner like the guardian of bad decisions. You pour the morning vinegar. It's the fresh batch, strong, clear, almost citrusy, if you squint your imagination. The kind that could polish a statue or give you an existential nosebleed. As the light begins to warm the upper walls, the early visitors arrive. First, the baker, always first. He stumbles in, flour still clinging to his eyebrows like snowy caterpillars. He sits with a sigh that somehow contains centuries of inherited exhaustion. "Too much barley," he mutters. You mop around him. He nods at you like an old comrade. Then a runner. Young, wiry, limbs like twine soaked in ambition. He practically sprints to the bench, does his business in record time, and bolts out again without ever making eye contact. He drops a single grape behind him, like an offering. You sweep it up, and whisper a thank you to Mercury. A brief lull. You take the chance to clean the sponge handles, wipe off yesterday's grime, tighten the cords, bless them with a few muttered words, only partially sarcastic. You find one sponge with a tooth embedded in it. You stare at it. You put it in the ask no questions bin. Then, a high ranking merchant breezes in. He smells like cinnamon and ego. Do you mind? He says, pointing to the bench like it's a throne. You don't mind. He proceeds to talk about grain prices, sea routes, and a man in Carthage who allegedly bathes in saffron infused goat milk. He uses the sponge and leaves it on the floor. You consider the pros and cons of mutiny. Then you pick it up, because that's who you are now. You are the sponge general. Next comes a man with a dog on a leash. He doesn't say much. The dog sniffs every corner. Then both use the facilities, one on the bench, the other on the wall. You don't ask which did which. You just mop. Mid-morning brings the old drama troupe. You've heard about them. Traveling performers, allegedly talented. They arrive in a flurry of scarves, eyeliner, and dramatic sighs. One shouts, "Oh, wretched belly, why dost thou gurgle so?" Another replies, "Because thou didst eat the garum again." They each choose a bench. One insists on using the sponge as a prop. You do not stop him. They perform a brief scene titled "The Tragedy of Too Much Lentil." It is surprisingly moving. They exit to applause from themselves. You sit, momentarily. Then a young man appears, nervous, pale, clutching a scroll like it's a shield. "Is this the bathhouse with the haunted mop?" You blink. "Rodericus." He nods. You point to the corner. He bows to the mop, leaves a coin at its base, then walks away. You are now caretaker to a cult artifact. Wonderful. Later, a woman walks in with a basket of baked goods. She sets it beside you. I know it's a rough job." You lift the cloth. Flatbread. Warm. Slightly burnt. Smells like mercy. You look up to thank her. She's already gone. You take a bite. It's perfect. Between guests, you check the drains. Nothing clogging. Just the steady gurgle of the Cloaca Maxima, breathing deep beneath the city. You whisper thanks to her. Not out of superstition, but out of respect. You refill the sponge bucket. You organize the scrolls left behind. Poems, complaints, one awkward sketch of a man who apparently really liked the bench's curvature. The next visitor is a boy with ink-stained fingers and a face full of curiosity. "Can I watch?" You shrug. "It's mostly cleaning." He nods. "I like cleaning." You show him the vinegar trick. How to swirl, how to aim, how to not overmop and accidentally start a philosophical debate. He watches in silence, then nods. "Important work," he says. You almost cry. He leaves behind a tiny charm, clay, shaped like a sponge. You add it to the shelf beside the boat. By midday, the bathhouse is bustling again. Noise, heat, smell. But it doesn't feel as heavy. Maybe because the sponge is lighter. Or maybe because you've stopped fighting it. You are no longer a man working in the bathhouse. You are the soul of it. The afternoon bath crowd rolls in like clockwork. Thicker, louder, steamier. You'd think after cleaning for half a day, you'd be immune to surprise, but you still manage to blink twice when a man walks in wearing nothing but a helmet and a sense of entitlement. "Is this the latrine?" he asks, adjusting the plume atop his head. You nod. "Yes, sir." "Perfect. I was told it has ambiance." You gesture to the torchlit marble and faint scent of vinegar-soaked trauma. He sighs. "Just what I hoped." He sits, helmet still on. You do not ask questions. You've learned not to. Then comes the magistrate's nephew. Again. The same one who thought the sponge was a writing utensil last week. He enters with a retinue of scribes, holding a scroll titled "The Digestive Rights of Free Romans." He sits, clears his throat, and begins reading aloud. Whereas the Republic is founded on order, and order begins in the bowels, you quietly begin mopping behind him. One of his scribes accidentally drops a wax tablet into the vinegar. You retrieve it with the ladle. Again, the other scribe asks if you've ever considered publishing your memoirs. You reply, "No one would believe me." The child looks at you, eyes wide, and says, "You're like a wizard, but with mops." You nod. You've been called worse. By early evening, the temperature drops slightly. A breeze curls through the archway like a polite apology. You let yourself lean against the sponge shelf for 3 whole minutes. Then, clang. Someone knocks over the ladle bucket. You turn to find a goat. Yes, a goat. In the latrine, chewing a sandal. You blink. The goat stares. You both seem equally confused. A man runs in moments later, wheezing. "There you are, you little tax write-off." He grabs the goat. The goat farts. The man apologizes. You mop. Again, because you are you. And goats don't clean up after themselves. The next visitor is interesting. A woman in her 40s, regal in posture, clearly out of place. She carries a scroll under one arm and what appears to be a homemade vinegar spritzer under the other. She nods at you. "I've come to observe." You raise an eyebrow. "I'm writing a treatise on sponge-based hygiene culture." You gesture to the benches. "Behold, the kingdom." She sits for nearly an hour, makes notes, measures things with a bit of string, sniffs the vinegar. She even takes a rubbing of the bench stone. On her way out, she says, "You're preserving an entire civilization, you know." You smile, mostly because no one has ever described your work in terms that didn't involve grunting. Then she adds, "But the vinegar's a little sharp today," and leaves. You make a note to water it down. A man enters next with a small parrot on his shoulder. The parrot squawks, "Wipe, wipe, wipe." The man laughs. He's learned from the best. You mop. You think deeply about the bird's career options. By late evening, the bathhouse slows again. You take the chance to organize the scrolls left behind. One recipe for barley mush, one complaint about sponge softness, one love poem addressed to Seat 4. You pin them to the wall of remarkably low standards. You notice something odd then, a tiny hole in the base of the vinegar barrel. A slow drip. You sigh. You plug it with wax. For now. Tomorrow's problem. A new boy enters, trembling. He clutches a scroll and a small coin. "I lost a bet," he says. You nod. He drops the coin into your bucket, bows, uses the sponge like it's cursed, and runs out. You respect that. The final wave is always strange. Tonight, it brings two men arguing about toga folds, a woman trying to sell you herbal sponges, and someone dressed as Neptune asking for directions to the steam room. You point. They nod with royal gravitas. Finally, you feel the bathhouse exhale. The light dips lower. The benches are still. You sweep for the last time. You replace the vinegar. You straighten the haunted mop, whose handle now feels warmer somehow. You sit. You take out your pouch, and you examine your collection. The bronze coin from the inspector, the tiny sponge charm, a fig that still refuses to rot, the parchment sketch of you holding a mop like a hero. You smile, not because it's over, but because you survived it. Again, and because tomorrow you'll do it all over. And somehow, that's okay. Dawn begins her slow stretch across the city once more, and the marble floor glows just faintly, like it's remembering how to be elegant before the crowds arrive. You're already awake. Of course you are. Sleep, in your case, is more of a pause than a reset. You crack your back against the archway wall. Something pops. It might have been you, or a tile. At this point, your joints and the bathhouse are on the same maintenance schedule. You rise. You begin the ritual. First, sponge check. All 6 accounted for. Rodericus, the haunted mop, gets a respectful nod. He's earned it. Second, vinegar inventory. You sniff the newest batch. Too mild. You add a splash from the emergency amphora. It burns your nose just right. Third, air sweep. You swing open the small side hatch to let in the breeze. For about 23 seconds, the latrine smells not bad, almost poetic, like a spring morning dipped in soap. Then it's gone, but it was there. You sweep the floor like a painter preparing a canvas. You arrange the sponge sticks at precise angles. You take a fresh cloth and polish the marble until it stops looking annoyed. You are ready. And just in time, too, because the regulars are already stirring. Old Gellius limps in first, as always, this time with a new claim. He once saved Julius Caesar from a particularly hostile cabbage. You don't doubt him, not today. The boy who lost the bet returns, this time voluntarily. He leaves you a little drawing. It's of you, holding a sponge like a torch, leading a crowd. You laugh. Then the pigeon returns. It lands neatly on the archway ledge and watches you like a judgmental feathered inspector. You stare back. I don't forget, you whisper. The pigeon coos, then flutters off, leaving only a single tiny feather behind. You let it float gently to the floor before sweeping it up with reverence. A pair of lovers walk by, hand in hand, arguing about whether soap counts as a luxury item. A merchant stops in to ask if he can advertise his garum jars on the bench wall. A scribe, you've never seen before, offers you a tip and a smile. You begin to wonder if Rome herself is softening towards you. Then you see him, the man with the goat. Again, he waves. You nod. He doesn't enter this time, just tips his cap and walks on. A small, bizarre part of you feels proud. You've become part of the city's rhythm, as essential as the baker, as regular as the forum gossips, as trusted as a sponge dipped twice in good vinegar. You mop without urgency now. Each stroke is familiar, ritualistic, maybe even meditative. You find yourself humming the same melody the massage girl sang 2 nights ago. You can't remember the words, just the calm. Someone sneezes nearby. Bless you, you say automatically. You turn the last bench cushion. Yes, cushion. Someone left it. Possibly as a joke, possibly not. You sit on it for a moment. It squeaks. You stand again. Too risky. By mid-morning, the bathhouse has slipped into its usual bustle, and yet you don't feel overwhelmed. You mop, and it feels manageable. You help someone find a sponge, and it feels noble. You retrieve a dropped earring, and it feels heroic. A senator walks in. You don't even flinch. He gives you a nod. A real one. He uses the facilities, drops a silver coin, and leaves without saying a word. You stare at the coin, then pocket it. Quiet victories. Later, as the afternoon wind rolls through, you catch your reflection in the vinegar bucket. Not glamorous, not clean, but still standing, still here. And maybe, just maybe, important. Because without you, this place would fall apart. The benches would rot. The vinegar would go sour. And the sponges would never get their moment in the sun. You rinse your hands. You hang the mop. You sit again in your usual spot, the cracked tile near the threshold. And for once, it doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like a perch, a place of perspective. You rest your back against the wall, feet splayed, palms open, and you whisper, Ave, me, and the latrine, in its strange, fragrant, echoing way, seems to whisper back. So now, my friend, the bathhouse fades, the torchlight dies to embers, the vinegar cools. The sponge, still damp, rests in its bucket like a soldier between battles. You can still hear it, can't you? The gentle drip of the basin, the quiet rustle of someone folding a robe in the far corner, the soft hum of the Roman city settling for sleep, its corners cleaned, its citizens relieved, its sponge stick returned to the shelf where it belongs. And you? You're still sitting there, on your little perch of cracked stone, breathing slowly, softly. The mists from the caldarium have drifted away. The fig pits have all been swept. The ghosts of awkward conversations and misused vinegar have slinked back into the pipes from whence they came. You've done enough, more than enough. In fact, if there were medals for patience, or for cleaning up after 12 kinds of dignity loss, you'd be wearing a chest full of them, glinting in torchlight, clinking gently as you do your sacred rounds. But no medals tonight, just quiet, just cool air, just a sponge stick in the corner that, maybe, just maybe, is smiling at you with one haunted bristle. So rest now, close your eyes. The city will still be here when you wake. And if not, well, the vinegar will. Sweet dreams, brave custodia, you've earned every moment of them. End of script. Sweet dreams.